With the election 10 months away and President Biden at last in campaign mode, Democrats are finally taking the gloves off against dishonest, hypocritical Republicans who are trying to take credit for the president's agenda despite actively campaigning, working, and voting against it in the first place. And it's glorious. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video, but here's the context. If you follow this channel at all, one of the things I consistently advocate for is a more ruthless Democratic Party. And I know that's not exactly popular with everyone. There's some people who appeal to civility politics and think that we should embody the West Wing ethic, right, or the Michelle Obama ethic. When they go low, we go high. Well, that's not the real world, right? And Republicans, despite their wild unpopularity, despite their terrible policies, and despite the fact that they're an authoritarian cult of personality, they are very often able to punch above their weight class, in part because they play politics ruthlessly. And we need a bit of that. Strategically, yes, but when we need to employ it, we need to be relentless. So I want to give you some clips here and kind of a situation which embodies that, I think, a reasonable degree of ruthlessness from the Democratic Party. And it concerns the bipartisan infrastructure law from President Biden's first year in office. So we're about to play a clip of Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, a Democrat, a Biden surrogate, and he'll kind of help set the stage.
Well, thanks for having me. Well, Joe Biden will win here in Minnesota. He's delivering on the issues they care about. He'll be out here tomorrow with Governor Evers from Wisconsin and the federal government putting $1 billion into the Blatnick Bridge, connecting the ports of Superior and Duluth. Those are the things that people care about, creating jobs. So you're exactly right. And I heard you speaking earlier on this. Donald Trump may run up the score in South Dakota, but he's losing Minnesota. He's going to lose Wisconsin. He's going to lose Michigan. He's going to lose Pennsylvania. And that blue wall will hold because he's doing the things necessary. And the alternative is chaos and retribution, as you saw last night.
So again, this is a pretty positive message, pretty assertive, right? Joe Biden is going to Minnesota and Wisconsin to talk about a major project that comes from the bipartisan infrastructure law. And again, that's critical. I'll say before we move on to kind of further this point is that Joe Biden is consistently polling ahead of Donald Trump in Minnesota. So that's good. Which brings us to the project itself. So Governor Walz, the Democrat, said that, there's $1 billion for this Blatnick Bridge. So he talks about it on Twitter. He says, big news for Minnesota. We officially secured $1 billion in federal funding to replace the aging Blatnick Bridge between Duluth and Superior. This investment will foster regional economic growth, strengthen our national supply chains, and improve safety and reliability of our transportation network. I'm grateful for the partnership of Governor Evers, Democrat of Wisconsin, our congressional leaders, and President Biden in making this happen, right? So a lot to be happy about, a lot to praise. But apparently, Democrats aren't the only one. As a matter of fact, you have this Republican, Pete Stauber, a Republican congressman. He says, I'm proud to announce that Duluth, Minnesota, and Superior, Wisconsin have received over $1 billion in federal funding to help replace the Blatnick Bridge. This is a huge win for his district, and I was proud to advocate for these funds. Learn more here. Except that's a bit misleading. And Governor Walz, a Democrat, again, actually took the gloves off and publicly called him out for it. He said, oh boy, I hate to talk politics when there's good news to celebrate, but this is too brazen to ignore. Congressman Stauber voted against every screw, steel beam, and concrete pier in this bridge. Luckily, President Biden worked with Stauber's colleagues and got it done without him. Thanks, Joe. But it's not just there. The White House also responded they quote tweeted Stauber and said, POV, point of view. You voted against President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, but are taking credit for it. This is nothing new. We'll get to it in just a second, but President Biden himself has talked about this, right? This phenomenon of Republicans attempting to take credit for things that they either, at worst, or at best rather, don't enthusiastically support, but very often actively campaign against, work against, and vote against. Stauber is just one of the latest high-profile examples. He, a Republican who voted against this, in his district will benefit from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. Right. And that goes to show how President Biden is indeed a bipartisan president. Now, I'll also remind you that you can go to whitehouse.com or .gov rather, if you want to see where the funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law are being applied and being dispensed. I mean, it's all over the United States and very often in the South. President Biden said that in many ways, red states are benefiting more from his bipartisan agenda than blue states. And there's a lot of evidence to support it. You can get as granular as you want on this website. This interactive map, it'll tell you where the project is, what the funding department is, how much. They'll tell you also, if you scroll down at the bottom, that the funding amount as well. The funding amount, like $1.6 million for a surface transportation block grant program, things like that. I mean, infrastructure of various forms. I encourage you to check it out if you want to see where the money is going. But yeah, Democrats are finally calling out Republicans because, again, think about it. We're in an election year, so it's in Republicans' best interest to try to take credit for as many things as possible, even those they voted against, because what they're banking on is that people will be too distracted or, too out of touch, rather, like not plugged into the day-to-day politics, to not realize that Stauber voted against this, right? Because why would why would the day-to-day American just obsess over this stuff, right? They have jobs and careers and families and friends and social lives and other engagements. So what Stauber is banking on is that the people of Minnesota won't know that he attempted to prevent them from benefiting from the very thing that they're benefiting from now, and now he's trying to take credit for it. It's completely gross. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, another good surrogate of the Biden administration, also addresses other areas and other states in which Republicans are benefiting from the bipartisan infrastructure law, but also, trying to keep people from benefiting in the most maximal way.
This administration has a lot to be proud of and has done so much good for so many people in so many parts of the country, including right here in Florida, where billions of dollars have come directly because of President Biden and that infrastructure package. We're doing railroad safety in Broward County. We're doing truck parking along I-4. We've improved the ports of Miami, the port of Tampa, and we're going to continue doing that. Even though Governor DeSantis has sent some of that money back to Washington unspent, we're still delivering billions of dollars of.
Right. So Ron DeSantis is another great example of somebody who constantly benefits from President Biden and the Democrats. He does it all the time, right? So it's not just, Republicans in Minnesota. It's also Republican governors of Florida. But again, Biden's talked about this before. He mentioned at the State of the Union back when Kevin McCarthy, as you may recall, was briefly Speaker of the House. He mentioned the hypocrisy and the dishonesty of the GOP, and he took it in stride.
We're just getting started. And I mean it sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry. I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects. And I'll see you at the groundbreaking.
Imagine if Donald Trump were in that position. The same Donald Trump who threatened to withhold federal assistance during COVID in blue cities and blue states, or during the George Floyd protests when there would be riots, right? This is, Donald Trump was a spiteful, driven Republican president. Joe Biden, who is actively demonized by the Republican right and MAGA Republicans, still attempts to govern in a bipartisan way, and his record is objectively superior to Trump's. And he takes it in stride, perhaps too good-naturedly, one might argue. Going to bring us back to, again, Democratic governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, to kind of put a button on the case for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, since in the end, in an election year, that's really what this is about.
Yeah, it's a combination of those things, Joe. People care, and they're seeing prices. I was up in Duluth yesterday, saw gas for $2.49. You're starting to see those things moderate. Wages are up. We've got low unemployment. But look, with the Trump people out there and the Republicans rooting for failure, they will never say something's working. We talk about job growth. Oh, it's bad, or something like that. I think this general sense of they don't want the chaos and they want a positive vision for the future. And I think that's now, as we pivot and we start to see the, this general election shape up to be the binary choice we've all been talking about, is it's going to, do you want chaos, negativity, doom and gloom, American apocalypse, or do you truly want to say what Joe Biden said? This is the United States of America. There's nothing we can't do. And I think this idea of building the economy out, creating jobs, coming and announcing a bridge project, the largest one we've seen in the Northland in history, those are exciting things. And I think those are what people are talking about, is they want to feel more secure both in their finances. They want to feel more secure in terms of how their politics is working. So
Yeah, it's a pretty compelling case. Right now, the polls, again, are not great for President Biden, although there are positive polls that are underreported by the media. They definitely focus on the sensationalism. But hopefully, Tim Walz is correct. And as the election, again, begins to increase and that timetable accelerates, that people will make their peace with the binary, that regardless of how you feel about the Democratic Party and its particular candidate, in this case, very probably President Biden, that it's going to be a choice between Donald Trump, MAGA Republicans, extremism, incompetence, dysfunction, the inability to govern, or President Biden, Democrats, and at least well-intended attempts at governing, which are very often successful and very often more successful than people give them credit for, and very often so successful that those same MAGA Republicans who try to work against it will try to take credit for it when it's convenient. Let me know what you think in the comments.